welcome our viewers once again on the Okwako Outlook with me, Geoffrey Jefferson. And today we're blessed to have a guest. I'm so sure every one of you will like her. You might have watched her somewhere else. You might have been, maybe you're following her on her social platforms. And today we are lucky to have her on the show. But before I introduce her, I want to give a shout out to Pride Inn Hotel for giving us the space and even supporting the work that we do. And also appreciate the support we get from our director Patrick. And therefore, without further ado, I am going to introduce our guest today. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I have been watching you. I was told by director Patrick about you. I think this is a year now I've been following you, and I really wanted to host you on my show because most of your poems and your story resonates with so many people. I checked out your social platform on TikTok. Then I watched this poem you're giving me called Slam something, and I was really impressed. Thank you so much for coming.
It's my
Let
pleasure.
me now introduce our guest today. She's a Kenyan most powerful spoken word voices, Ska Poetry. I want to find out about Ska Poetry later on. You were crowned the 2024 Slam Queen of Kenya, right?
Yes, I was.
Ska is known for her raw emotive performances that dives deeper into healing, identity, and resilience, with viral pieces like some of your pieces. It called Exploring Scars, right? Yeah, and the goal is to be a hyper. Is it hyper or hippie?
It's hippie.
Hippie, yes. Hippie. She is she's inspiring audiences both here at home and across the globe. I have seen you travel. Welcome so much.
Thank
Ska
you.
Poetry. Do you want us to use Ska Poetry, or probably you would want to tell us another name that people don't know?
No, I'm very okay with using ska poetry.
Thank you.
But my other name is Priska for anyone who would like to know.
Priska.
But I love ska poetry.
Born and raised in Kenya?
Yes, I was born and raised across Kenya. So yeah.
Beautiful. Ska Poetry, you are known for blending raw emotion, vulnerability, and spoken words into compelling messages of healing, identity, and empowerment. And this is some of the things that, especially with the current generation, a lot is happening.
Truly.
People have disassociated from the normal life to their claims to social media. And you'd never understand the scar somebody's scar is holding or carrying. There is you might not understand the reason why people are disassociating from others, because maybe others have been hurt by others. They just feel like, I think social media is the space I deserve to be, or here I find my peace. But I want us to have a discussion on. We're going to talk about the journey behind your voice as a ska poetry, and the origin and identity, artistry, and personal healing. Those are some of the things I want us to look at in the next few minutes that we are going to be with you. So, who is ska poetry beyond the stage?
Beyond the stage, ska poetry is a person who believes in love, equality, equity, and I think that comes out in my poetry as well. I am just a human loving humans and loving the world, loving the earth, and trying to figure out how we can constantly be better to each other, for each other, and to the world that we live in. So I think that's who I would say I am at heart, really. A person who's just in love with the world, in love with the people around me, and trying to figure out how do we make the world a better place for all of us.
Beautiful. Why is ska poetry?
So in the beginning, like I said, my name is Priska. So in the beginning, really, it was just my friends started calling me Ska while we were in university, and the name stuck. It became my nickname. Now, when I started performing my poetry, I chose to keep the name Ska Poetry because for me, scars, I always say scars are evidence that wounds heal. And I would like my poetry to be the same. I want my poetry to always be evidence that wounds heal. So that's why I retained the name as a reminder, to anyone and everyone going through something, that scars are evidence that wounds heal. In the end, whatever you're going through, whatever it feels like right now, whatever journey you're on, things heal. Things do come out on the other side.
Yeah, it is still the other side of the whole thing you're going through.
Yeah.
So can you share the story behind your name? Like, you have just done that, but what does it mean to you as a person?
To me as a person, it really just means the same. Ska poetry. It's, for me, I retain it because I want it to be a message of healing, but I don't want it to be a message of healing that doesn't really what should I say, face the reality of what it means to heal. I don't want it to be roses and flowers and rose-colored glasses. I want you to know there will be a scar, but that scar will be evident that something in you healed. So it's just, I felt like it was truthful of me, because the thing is, even when we heal, our experiences, those experiences have shaped us, and they will shape us for the rest of our lives, right? So it was trying to give homage to this wound, but also understanding that it has healed. But also, even when things heal, they don't disappear. Just to find that balance of truth, that while you may always carry your wounds with you, you can carry the healed version of that. So from your pain, you can carry the lessons. Not to tell you forget the wound, but to tell you look at the sky, Yeah.
So the sky is there to teach you, or maybe to help you understand that yes, there is a challenge, but at the end of it all, there is also a solution.
There's a solution. There's something to carry from it.
Perfect. You speak a lot about scars, both seen and unseen.
Yeah.
What are some of the key life experiences that shaped your message, or that shapes your message?
Honestly, I think it's just everyday life. I think when people hear scars, we expect them to be this once in a while things that happen and they change your life completely. But the truth is, everyday life is sometimes very overwhelming. You've ever had that story of everything can be fine, and then you just drop a spoon and suddenly you're crying and you're bawling your eyes out, and you can't understand why dropping this spoon is the thing that has broke you today. But it's just because everyday life can be overwhelming. So it's not one experience, but it's looking back at all the experiences you've gone through and trying to make sense of them, trying to make sense of who you are, the relationships you've had in your life, how they've affected you. And it's not in the big things, but it's in the everyday things that happen. So for context, I was an internally displaced person during the 2007-2008 post-violence, and I think it shaped my life, but it didn't shape my life in that moment. It shaped my life over the next 10 years. Because after that, when my family moved, my family never really found home. Most people are lucky to relocate to a place and then now be permanently placed there. But my family was on the move for the next 10 years, trying to find, okay, where can we relocate? Then hear about a good business somewhere or a good business environment and be like, and my family, they're entrepreneurs. So they'd be like, oh, there's something good happening there. And then we'd go there, probably stay for a year or two, and then things don't work out. Or it doesn't just feel like the first home you were in. And then we move again, and then we move again. And so I think for me, while that the experience in itself, that one, those 3 months where the country was in chaos and whatever might not have shaped me deeply, but the consequence of those 3 months was that for the next 10 years, my family became, what are they called? People who are always wandering,
Are they nomads?
We became,
nomads.
exactly. We became nomads, and the experience of being a nomad shaped me deeply. And so it's just like I was saying, it's the everyday life. So it's all the moving, all the figuring out yourself. And I've come to realize when you don't have a lot of permanence in your life, you tend to go a lot into your head to think, to try to figure out stuff for yourself. And so I think that shaped me a lot. And so I would say it's just the everyday things. It's the everyday heartbreak. It's the everyday argument with your mother. It's the everyday trying to give grace to the people who raised you. It's the everyday trying to make sense of the relationships in your life, trying to make sense of who you are, and figuring out, is this how I want to show up in the world?
All right. So, thank you. Now, you during, I think, the post-election violence, I think it affected so many people.
Yes,
and
it did.
Talking of, you resonate with that situation. I think I haven't met, no, apart from a friend of mine in Eldoret who suffered from the same. I know how that felt, and so that is why you basically base your story from that scar, or besides that there is another maybe scar in life that maybe you have experienced you as a person that also makes you do this kind of poetry.
I think that's what I was trying to say. It's the everyday scars, you know. It's every day. It's every day. It's having to wake up as a human being and reckon with what it means to be alive in this age every day, you know. Sometimes, like, it's every day, because even last year's and this year's protests have affected me deeply, but then they're not a one occurrence event. They're not something that happens and suddenly your brain goes, woo, you know. It's every day. It's the living of it. The living of
every
it
day.
every day.
Is happening.
Every day something is happening. Every day you have something new to reckon with. And I think for me, it's just, honestly, it's just the business of life. It's the business of life.
Actually, so many people resonate with your poems because you speak to their situations. You speak to their. I saw your following. It's really a lot. And as I said to you before we started this show, when we were conversing, a friend of mine, I think one day I'll host him. I introduced him to your social platform, and he's always been asking, he's gone through a lot.
Okay.
So he thinks when you speak that way, probably.
But now, through a lot as well.
Yeah. So maybe I'll make you meet him one of these days. So what was there any defining moment when poetry became your healing tool?
There was a defining moment, but in that defining moment, poetry did not become my healing tool. Poetry became my expressive tool. I remember that, again, having moved a lot, having had no permanence, and I think at some point, of course I didn't know this then, but looking back, I think at some point it felt like I was the only permanent thing in my life. And so my brain and my thinking, my thoughts, my consciousness was like the only permanent place that I had. It's not a physical place, but it felt like it was the only permanent place that I had. And so I lived in my head a lot. Even as a child, people used to call me aloof because I lived in my head a lot. And I think when you begin to live in your head, you begin to think a lot, you begin to question a lot of things. And I had begun that journey without really, of course, having the words or the language to explain that. And I remember at some point when I was like 12, I think, or 11, I came across this poem called I Refuse to Accept Your Brotherly Hand by Henry Barlow. And it was a poem that spoke to corruption. It was a poem that spoke to the state of the human being or rather to the state of the nation at that point. And This poem said that many were hungry and many did not have food to eat, and many were outside watching through chain link fences. And the poem also gave a warning to the person behind the chain link fence, telling them, brother, one day people will be more angry than they are hungry. And on that day, they will break those chain link fences to come to the wealth that you have accumulated for yourself and put, these chains around. And while I think for the first time, I could then find words to express all these thoughts that I had been having in my head without ever really understanding them. Because again, you can't be a child who goes through the post election violence and not begin to think about politics and not begin to think about how that affects your life. Because one day I was playing with my neighbors, and all of a sudden, because of two, at least that's what it looked like to me then, because of 2 3 politicians, I have to abandon my home, I have to start a whole new life. I don't understand why. It doesn't make sense to me.
It felt like your life is it's governed by politicians.
Yeah, suddenly these people who I did not know even existed yesterday, or their importance yesterday, suddenly they've made such a permanent effect in my life, and today I have to figure out my life all anew. And I think then I began to, when I came across this poem at around 11 and 12, the thoughts and feelings that I had been having in my life since the post-election violence now began to make sense. It's like finally I found someone who was saying the things that I had been thinking and feeling, but they were saying them in such a way that made sense. They gave me language to my thoughts, they gave me language to my feeling. Because one of the things that happened after the post-election violence is that a lot of people had to live in tents, literally. And that's literally the expression of that.
Were literally displaced to live on streets.
Yeah, to live on streets. And that's literally the expression that there's so many people on this side who are hungry and starving, and then there's the chain link fence, and there's you across the fence with so much amassed wealth. And now I could begin to see what I had been seeing in my real life and wondering and pondering on as a child, and just not knowing, like, the thoughts had felt too big for me at the time, or rather too confusing. I didn't know what to make of them. And then here's a poem that I've read by, I suppose, a grown-up person that says exactly the same things I've been thinking of. And so in that moment, I found so much freedom and so much expression. And then poetry first became a place where I could express myself, a place where my thoughts were not too big, a place where Langston Hughes could speak about the same things that I was speaking on. Yeah. And he would speak about how, again, all those experiences, having to go from place to place, you live a very different economic life as an internally displaced person, because you were stable, now you're not. You figure out your life, and then you don't, and then you figure it out, and then you don't. So it felt like I went through all the economic cycles, right? At some point I was rich, at some point I was poor, at some point I was mid-class. I went through all the things. And so to be able to look at it from that perspective, it was just like, in poetry, all these things I was thinking stopped being big things that I couldn't understand and I didn't have words for. Suddenly there was a place where I could go to think the way I thought and feel at home.
Yeah, and now you brought it out by poetry.
Yeah.
That's a very good way of communicating. And actually, wow. Okay, so how do you navigate vulnerability as a strength in your art?
I think again, poetry became the place where I could go to be myself, to have the big thoughts.
Like you rediscovered yourself through poetry.
Yeah, I found home. It's not necessary. It's like when you've been knowing yourself, but you've been thinking you're alone.
Oh yeah.
Right? And then you read these things that show you all these thoughts that you have. There are other people who have them too.
Yeah.
And so suddenly this is the place that I would call my safety net, right?
Yeah,
this is the place I go to feel at home. And so I think in my writing that showed as well, because I became very open and honest. And of course, when you're open and honest, you also become vulnerable. And also, it became that place where I can go to write anything that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't matter what it was. I could be totally honest with myself. So when I started writing my poetry, I didn't even write it to share with the world.
Mm-hmm.
I've been writing for so long, and I only started sharing my poetry, I think, 2 years back in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd been writing since I was, I think, 12. I'd been writing different poems, but I was just writing to understand myself, to understand the world, to... So my writing was very, very vulnerable because it was never even meant to be shared. It was writing for the little girl who was just, trying to make sense of the world. And so there was so much vulnerability there. There was, I don't understand why this makes sense. There was, how can I make sense of this? There was, this hurts and I don't understand why. There was, this is a lot for a small child to carry. There was everything that I felt, I put it there. And then in time, when I started sharing my poetry, I realized that a lot of people, the same way as a child I was looking for a place to feel home, a lot of people come to my poetry now to feel at home.
To feel at
like,
home.
yeah, to feel seen. To be like, I am going through this thing, and look, she's written about it, and she's written about it so honestly and so truthfully,
As
you know.
though she's talking to me.
Exactly. There was someone who told me that the thing that they find different about my poetry is that it feels like a conversation. It's never about meter, rhythm, rhyme. It just feels like someone.
It is true because it happened to me as well. I told you before it is actually true. Like your poetry or your poems mostly speak to people. Like you are conversing with someone.
And I think in the world with our gifts we end up giving what we were seeking the most. And maybe when I went to poetry, I was seeking that person to talk to again, that person to make me make sense of the world, that person to figure out why all these things are happening and what they meant and what could be changed or what couldn't be changed about them. And so I think maybe in time, in seeking that in poetry, then I became that thing as well for myself first, because I started doing those things for myself. I started having those conversations with myself, figuring out what is happening and making sense of my feelings. And I think now when I started to share my work, then also the same environment that I had created for myself, people found, then now it's like the more I shared, the more space I created around me where people can just come and have those honest, vulnerable conversations. You know, a lot of people approach me after a performance and someone just shares their whole life story. And she says, or he says, I've never had the courage to tell someone this, but your poetry it broke something in me. Even in my comments, you go read them online and you find people are making so many confessions. Somebody's telling you about their child that died, the grief that they've gone through after that. Another one is telling you about the uncle that molested them. I think I created space for the conversations that no one had with me as a child. And the conversations that I felt desperately someone should have had with me. And I began to have them with myself. And when I shared my poetry, I now created a space where everyone can just come and talk about those things and feel safe and feel at home and feel vulnerable and be honest and truthful about them.
I understand most people treat vulnerability as weakness, but to you it as vulnerability seems to be a strength. It's really because it has attracted so many people to you because you are in your art, when you're doing your poems and people are resonating with you, you are vulnerable to a point that you need people to understand. You are better than today. Tomorrow could be better. I mean, you're trying to open a little box in somebody's mind that was really locked. You never want anybody to even touch it. So you're doing that, and a number of us people, human being, we have that one box that you never want somebody to touch.
Open.
So when it is opened through the way you're doing it, I mean, and most of those boxes carry a lot of negativity.
They do.
So when it is opened, this person is relieved and set free. I really resonate with you. Okay. So how did you start performing? Now I want to look at the artistic growth of yours. How did you start performing spoken word, and what was your first performance like?
My first performance was when I was in high school, actually. Like, my first performance of a spoken word. Now, I have been, like I said, I interacted with literature and poetry very early in my life. I had been performing a lot, just not my own poems or not in the version of spoken word. So, like, even the poem that I was speaking about, I Refuse to Take Your Brotherly Hand, it's a poem that I performed when I was like 10, but it wasn't my poem, right? So, I think my earliest performance dates back even to when I was in class 2 or whatever. But they were structured and not really authentic. Well, I wouldn't say not authentic, let's just say not intentional for me.
Yeah.
And I think the first time I performed a poem that was intentional for me, I was around 17. And I performed a parody of a piece that I had seen online from Slam Africa Poetry. But from Slam, I think Atlanta or America, I don't know. I forget now. But it was a poem that deeply resonated to me at the time. And it was speaking about how true worship is feeding the orphan, the widows. It was speaking about how true worship really is in how you live and not you going to church.
Yeah.
And so I performed it at school, at our church then, in the school. And I remember being so overwhelmed with the response. I remember feeling like I had a voice. I'd always felt that through poetry, but here were things that were so hard to articulate that I could through a poem and people could also resonate. I just remember feeling very empowered, and I remember feeling I have a voice. And then after that, my next performance would be at a mental health concert, which I had organized with a couple of my friends with the support of Equity Bank. And I remember also at that point feeling very empowered, feeling very empowered. I think that's the thing that I would say the most. You feel on that stage, it feels possible to change the world because you have the attentions of people's hearts. You can truly impact people. You can begin to make people think about the life they live and how intentional they are with it. And it just became now a moment for me when I was like, this is something. And this is a gift that I have, and I would like to continue sharing it with the world. But then, of course, I was still 17. I didn't know how to go about that. It was just a feeling, not really a strategy or anything. Then I went to campus. I would perform like at campus events and stuff like that. And then after campus is when now in 2023, that's when I decided, okay, I've been having this gift for the longest time. I have written so many poems for the longest time. I know that my poetry touches people's hearts. And I began to think, now what can I do with this gift? And how can I share it with the world? And then that's when I went to Slam. Slam is a poetry competition that is worldwide. So it's in the country, but it's also in other countries as well. And so I went to that poetry competition as one of the first platforms that I performed at. I came as a second runners up, and then I went again the next year and I won now in 2024. But then after 2023, I thought to myself, you know, in that poetry competition, it's only most of the time it's people who love poetry or who know about poetry or who are like, you know, have that access that go to those spaces. And I said, but I want my poetry to do more, and I want my poetry to touch more people's hearts. That's when I started my TikTok channel at that time, because I was like, I don't just want to share my poetry with the 300 or 1,000 people that come to see me perform. One of my deepest beliefs is that art should not be for the privileged. Art is for the people.
Everybody.
Art is for the people. And so therefore I thought, how do I make sure that my poetry is received by the people? Because also growing up, one of the attitudes that was very common is that poetry is for like the elite. And I remember always, like, when I was growing up, I was like, no, poetry is not for the elite because it speaks to me and I'm not an elite. And so I wanted to share my poetry in a way that every person felt invited to watch it, to listen to it, and to reckon with the things that I was asking or talking about in those poems. That's when I started sharing online. And slowly by slowly, I just grew, and everybody was like, oh my God, I've never loved listening to poetry, but this is so beautiful. And I think it's just the exposure. I think once people start listening, they're like, oh, I actually love poetry. It's just I never had the exposure. And so that's what I did with my TikTok channel as well. Eventually, of course, I moved to other social media platforms as well because I could see that there was a great following and people wanted to listen to poetry more.
Wow. Because I listened to your poems, I was like, ooh. I almost called. I have a friend of mine actually. I shared with him the link, the one I just mentioned to you, who is coming. He's not in Kenya. I mentioned with him, and then I shared with him your social media, and he's been following, and he's like, Jeff, you're going to host her. So yeah, you're touching so many hearts. You're touching a lot of, a lot of lives. Like people. I listen a lot to Oprah Winfrey and a lot of things that she says. I took a break a bit to listen to you, and I'm realizing that actually I need to listen more. I'm not good when it comes to poetry thing. I'm into music and listening to motivational thing. But now I'm finding out. I'm realizing that poetry, and especially the way you bring it out, I resonated very well with me. The one I shared with you before we started the conversation about when we talked about your mom. I mean, until now, even yesterday in the evening, I think I listened to it. I went to, I think it was during the time when you were performing at Slam Africa.
Okay.
I watched it on YouTube. I've watched it like 7 times now. Today will be my 8th time if I have to watch it. So, who are your biggest influence in poetry and performance?
In poetry and performance, I think I don't necessarily have a biggest influence. I'm just influenced by the collective.
Okay.
Right? I listened to so many poets over time. Oh my god. I started listening to like poets performing when I was again like 11, 12. So over the years, before I actually ever went on a stage, I think I'd listened to more than 100 poets. I don't even remember their names honestly, because also one of the things I like to do is receive the art and just leave the artist alone. Because
you don't know.
Even me personally, I would like for you to receive the art and just leave the artist alone.
Like you know, anybody who does poetry that you look up to, like really one, just one, like you look up to, like, this guy has really influenced me one or the other.
I think there are a lot, but what I'm trying to say is that not one major person has had like a deep impact. It's just all of them, and it's all the different poems that people listen to. But that being said, I listened a lot to Rudy Francisco. I listened a lot to Amina Mahmoud. I listened a lot to even like local poets, like my friends. Like there's a poet called Nyash. I love her work. It's so beautiful. I think I also Rupi Kaur. I read her poems all the time. I love Andrea Gibson. I think for me poetry is one of those things that it's the collective, it's not the individual. Because yesterday I was listening to a poem by Mutabaruka on the radio, and he said, this poem will be like all the other poems. This poem will not change anything. Which is to say, poets have been saying the same thing since time immemorial. Like, you can listen to a poem by Mutabaruka, you can listen to a poem by Andrea Gibson, and they have different ways, but at the end of the day, they address the same thing. So I think that's what I'm trying to say, that it's not really an individual poet who has had such deep impact. It's poetry in itself as a whole. Because even Langston Hughes, I don't think I've ever like listened to him perform or anything, but I read a lot of his work through when I was in high school. I read a lot of his work and I loved it. Maya Angelou, of course, again, I read a lot of her work. And there's Nina Simone. I mean, she was a musician, but her music is poetry when you listen to it. You know, when she says, "Oh, to be young, gifted, and black," it's across the board. It's the collective. I think it's the collective that I've had that influence on me. The different people over different years who have spoken to the same thing in a different way.
Yeah. Perfect. And how do you prepare emotionally before stepping on stage? Knowing your work is deeply personal. Actually, your work is it's very, very personal.
It's very personal.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I performed. So I wrote a poem that was a tribute to the people we lost during the Gen Z protest last year in 2024. And I remember I wrote that poem and I put it aside because I wanted to work through the feelings that were in that poem. And so I would perform it for the first time 6 months later after writing it. And I thought to myself, surely after 6 months of writing this poem, the emotions are ziko kando, now I can just perform and make it a performance. But I remember halfway through the poem, I started crying as I was performing because I had forgotten just how much grief I had packed in that one poem. I'd forgotten, we lost so many people during the protest last year.
Yeah, there were so many.
Yeah, and I think the greater loss was not even, of course, the people, but for me, the greater loss was as a generation, you truly begin to reckon with the state of your country. You begin to reckon with what it would mean to change your country.
Yeah.
You begin to reckon with what history has meant. It's truly, it was a moment of reckoning for so many of my generation. So you're not just losing people, but you're losing your faith in the government.
Yeah.
You're losing your faith in the system. You're beginning to think about things, to think about the promise of the life you lived and the reality of the life you're now living. And it was just a moment, I think, of so much loss for us. And especially to be young, you still believe so deeply in the world. You believe in changing the world. You believe in giving good. You believe in fighting for your freedoms, only to be met with hate, to be met with violence. And it was so much grief, and so I'd forgotten how much grief I'd packed in that poem. And I remember after performing that poem, I was talking to a friend of mine and I said, I thought after 6 months this would be an empowering poem. I thought when I was standing there I would be so angry at the government, and so I would stand in righteous anger as I'm performing that poem, but really I just stood in grief and loss. And I think that is to say, sometimes no matter how well I prepare, I become very overwhelmed with what I am saying. Because again, what I'm saying is always real and true to me. And so it's another moment to deal with those truths. But I try to prepare by really working, really facing the truth of what I'm saying. So if I am saying, for example, Free Congo, in the poem Free Congo, when I wrote it, I remember I had to write it over a period of 3 months. Because as I was researching, my heart was just breaking. And my heart was breaking. And I had to reach times where I was like, no, I have to put this aside and just breathe. I need to put this aside and breathe. And then I will come back to it later. And so even when I practice performing, that's what I do. I practice and I practice and practice till I feel, okay, now I have allowed these emotions to overwhelm me. I have allowed them to beat me. I have allowed them to wrinkle me. I have allowed them to do what I want them to do to my audience, to the extent that now I can carry the weight of that poem without breaking under it. Because I've allowed myself to break and break and break and break under it, till now I can carry it without breaking.
Yeah.
Does that translate?
Yeah, it does. Wait. The Gen Z thing, and you reminded me of Free Congo. And the young people that died during post-election, and a number of them were young actually.
Yeah.
They're just people who are coming up to say, you know what, this is not the right thing, you need to do the right thing, and then somebody's killed. It also instills fear to the other generation that would want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Maybe they might think if you do the right thing, you'll meet death or something will happen to you. And that is a narrative that has to be changed actually. I think that is why I told you your work is deeply personal.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really is. So but let's look at creative process. Can you walk us through how a ska poetry piece is born from the idea to performance?
Um, I think all of them are first and foremost born from my thoughts, and so my poetry is just a creative way of me saying what I really think. For example, the other day I posted a poem that says, "It is revolution to not chase the corporate ladder," for me, at least. And this are so I left corporate in 2023 again when I started now focusing on my poetry after working for around a year. And I sat with myself and I wondered, is this really the life I want to pursue? In Nairobi, most of the people in the workforce have to commute for 4 hours every day to go to and from work. So in the morning, 2 hours, and then in the evening, 2 hours. And then you're still working now for like 8 to 10 hours.
Most of them actually, they do more than 10 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you look at your life, at least when I was looking at my life then, I would see that after working, I'm only left with 10 hours. This 10 hours, I need to sleep. This 10 hours, I just need to do everything else in my life that's not working. I need to make time for my friends. And I began to ask myself, is this really the life that I want to live? And then I came to a conclusion that no, this is not the life I wanted to live. Then followed with me living corporate and stuff. And so these are thoughts that I had been thinking about in my life. I've been thinking, like, is this really the way it should as human beings, should we dedicate all of our lives just to work, and I was thinking about how somebody retires at like 70 or 65, and then they've been working all their lives. They went from school to working, and then now they're 70-year-old and they've retired, and they're wondering, what do I even do with the rest of my life, and I just felt like that was not a very fulfilling way to live. And so that poem that I just wrote and shared the other day has been born through all those processes and those experiences of me just saying, no, I don't think this is the fashion of what I want to live with, and thinking about it. And of course, having conversations with people around me and talking and also looking to other people who think like I think. And then now in the end, all these thoughts that I've been thinking on become expressed in a poem. And then in the end, after 2 years after leaving corporate, is when I come and tell the world, you know what, it is revolution for me to not chase the corporate ladders, because at the end of the day, capitalism has made us believe that the worth of a person is in the work they do, but the worth of a person is in the person that they are. The work you do is just part of who you are. And so the work that you do has to be fulfilling and resonating for you.
Most people don't know that.
And I think it was so that's how the poem was born. And I think all of those poems are born like that. They're thoughts that I've had for years and years and years, and finally it's like one day something just clicks and now it becomes a poem. But they've always been floating words in my head, and now suddenly they become one thing in prose that I can write.
So what theme do you find yourself revisiting often in your work, and why?
I think for me the theme I would say is most recurrent is womanhood. Womanhood. And I think it's because I experience the world as a woman, and I have been influenced by very many women in my life as well. And so it's just I think it's the why I keep recurring to it in my poetry is because it's very present as well in my life. That which we say, as within, so without. So if that is what is going on in my life constantly, how the women who raised me affected me, how I live my life as a woman, how my friendships now in my adulthood are also affecting me, and how they're shaping me and shaping my view of the world, and all of that. If that's what's constantly going on in my life, then automatically that's what I will put out the most. And I think that's why. The other things that I would say reoccur a lot are issues around social justice. So things like capitalism and the effects that it has in our life. How can we imagine a world where we are equal in society, where every human is dignified just by living? Like, I think people ask me what system do I think we should adapt to, and I say I don't know what system, but the system that we should adapt is always the one that dignifies everyone's humanity, because I think at the end of the day that's what everybody needs they need to live a life that is dignified in their humanity.
Yeah.
And I think that also comes back a lot because these are the thoughts that I've been thinking on a lot of my life. I'm just like, again, to live as a nomad is to be exposed to so many different, could I say, settings. So I lived in the rural areas. I lived in the urban centers. I lived among the poor income neighborhoods, middle income neighborhoods.
Like it
Across
really
the
exposes you to
spectrum.
almost
Yeah,
everything.
it expresses you to literally everything, and then now you're sitting at a place just comparing. Yesterday I was here, but today I'm here, and today I'm there, and I'm the same person. It's just circumstances that change, and so therefore you recognize that for that person to be there, and for that person to be there, and for that person to be there, honestly, sometimes it's just a matter of luck.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to that conversation of everything happens for a reason. And you're like, honestly, it's just a matter of luck that these people have found themselves in the situation that they are in. And so you begin to ask yourselves, how can we all live a life that is dignified? And I think those questions and thoughts also show up a lot in my poetry.
Yeah, you're right. So we're about to wrap up this, but allow me to ask you this. I mean, you've mentioned capitalism and a woman. A woman actually carries life.
Yes.
Everybody actually, like, everybody is made of a woman. I say I came from a woman, you came from a woman. Like in your poetry, the people that you normally approaches you to share their stories, are they women or even both genders? They come to you to share.
They're both genders actually. Yeah. They're both genders. It's just, I think I've come to realize with my poetry, when I speak about a mother, men have mothers, women have mothers.
We are born with a woman.
When I speak about that, people don't look at it like this is a woman speaking about her mother. They just assume, the way people receive my poetry is when I'm speaking about my mother, they think about their mother, right? When I'm speaking about my life, they think about their life. When I'm speaking about my heartbreak, they think about their heartbreak. So it resonates across the board because they don't put gender to it. Because at the end of the day, we are all experiencing this life, you know?
Yeah.
So whether it's like, when I speak about the Gen Z protests, women were there, men were there. Actually, I think my audience is like 58-42 from the statistics. So it's not like 60% this and 30% that. It's quite a small divide because the only difference is like a 6%. 42 are men and 50. Yeah, I think 42 and 58. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It's not a big margin.
Yeah, it's not a very big margin.
So what has poetry taught you about yourself that nothing else has ever done? Ever taught you?
Or I would say poetry has taught me that everyone has capacity for good and bad. Because again, like I said, in my poetry, I really face myself. There's this thing I say a lot. In my poetry, I am my most honest self. Like in my poetry, even I cannot lie to me. So even the things that I don't want to know about myself, when I am writing, I find out about them. I find out about those things.
So it brings the true self.
It brings my true self to my face, and it shows me, no, you're not inherently a good person. You're not inherently a bad person. As human beings, we have capacity to be the worst, and we have capacity to be the best. And every day it is a choice how you show up in the world. You choose how you show up in the world because we have capacity to show up across the spectrum. And so like my poetry does a lot of like looking at the past, looking at how I've lived my life, and then just like, am I okay with that? Is that who I want to be going forward, or is there something I want to change? For example, like when I said I was working in corporate for like a year, and then through my poetry I was just thinking about like, is this the life I want to live? So it has a lot of reflection in it, and some of the times I'm reflecting how I showed up to a friend. I'm reflecting at things that I did. You know, some of this poetry doesn't get to be shared, but I write poetry about everything. I write poetry even like Other sides, if I just drink a good cup of tea, I'll probably write a poem about it, you know. So I write about my friends, I write about my friendships, I write about my lovers and how I show up, the dynamics of that. And I think my poetry has really awakened me to who I am and the capacity that I have to both be good and be bad, for lack of a better word, because those words are just so basic. They don't carry. But I think that's the one thing that nothing has done for me the way my poetry has. Like, in a Kwanisha way. This is who you think you are? No, this is who you actually are. And then now it makes you make the conscious decision of, okay, now this is who I am. But this is who I want to become. How do I start to show up every day as the person I want to become rather than the person I am? And it's just like, now you begin to live a more intentional life. That's the other thing that my poetry has done for me. It has made me really live an intentional life. Like, it's hard for me to do things just because.
You have to do it intentionally.
I do most things intentionally. Of course, I'm still human now. There's that gap of sometimes you just do things. But, like, I live a very intentional life. One of the poems you spoke about at the beginning of this episode is the poem called "The Goal Is to Become My Grandmother."
Yeah.
And I think now, after writing that poem, I would tell you I do almost all of those things daily. And it was like a prophecy of what I wanted to become and now what I have embodied over the years. So, because I wrote that poem like at the beginning of the year or like at the end of last year. But where I am right now is that the things that I said I wanted to become then, most of them are things that I now do every day or things that I do regularly. And so it's just, it has really helped me to live an intentional life.
Wow. So do you think you found a purpose in what you're doing at the moment?
I have. And I think maybe it was always there. Because I remember when I was having that conversation with myself in 2023, I asked myself, what do I want my poetry to do for the world? And I think what my poetry had done for me the most is create a safe space of healing and community, like vulnerability. And so I said to myself, I want my poetry to heal the world. And I think then I found a purpose for it. I found a purpose for myself. And I think more and more I see that which I intended to do is happening.
Yeah, and actually your poems are healing the world. I'm one of the people, I'm a beneficiary. I'm a beneficiary. So if your younger self was watching this, what would you want her to hear from you today?
I think I would tell her that life surprises you, you know. I thought I would be a lawyer or a journalist, and in so many ways I am a lawyer and a journalist. I'm a person who fights for the rights of the world.
Because what you're doing is literally...
Right? And I'm also a person who creates awareness, and I think that's the thing I would say the most. Life surprises you, but learn to trust yourself and learn to trust your intuition, trust who you are, you know, trust who you are as a person and show up as who you are as a person every day, and the rest, it will find you.
Thank you so much. We are coming to the end of this episode, and then we'll pick it up to our second conversation. We still have Scarlet Poetry. You will discover more about her. When we come back, we'll talk about power. We need to know more about you, and so on and so forth. So we are taking a commercial break. We'll be back. Thank you so much, Pride In, for continuing to support us. See you in the next episode. Thank you.